I don't know if you've noticed, but everyone is talking about Chainsaw Man. And because it's current year in a Mappa anime, that means that everyone is talking about CG. CG is short for CGI, which is short for Computer Generated Imagery. If you ever thought an anime looked like a cutscene from a PlayStation 2 game, that's CG, the bugbear of the anime community. No joke, this stuff divides fandoms like Moses parting the Red Sea, and I promise to limit the references to as much as possible. To talk about CG, though, we have to talk about Mappa, and to talk about Mappa, we gotta go back. This is Masao Maruyama. He does the anime, and he's really good. In the 70s, he worked for Madhouse. That's the studio behind Trigun, Perfect Blue, Paprika, the version of Hunter x Hunter that you know about, and Death Note. Obviously, none of those were made in the 70s, but just trust me, you've never heard of any of the works from the 70s, and they're really hard to watch. Point being, Madhouse was a big deal, and our boy Maru worked there. And by the mid-2000s, Maru was getting tired of the mass-produced nature of the work that Madhouse was doing, so he split off and started his own studio called Maruyama Animation Produce Project Association, or Mappa. Within the decade, Mappa went from being Maru's personal production company to producing 4 separate series at the same time. Maru, stop me if this sounds familiar, grew tired of the mass-produced nature of the work that Mappa was doing, so he split off and started his own studio called Studio M2, where he remains today. Mappa, in recent years, has been the center of a lot of discussion around the use of CGI in anime. It started with their first season animating Attack on Titan when everyone and their grandmother was moaning about how bad it looked. And I'm not saying that most of the people complaining wouldn't have noticed if nobody had told them, but I've got no problem implying it. Either way, the community was in a tizzy, and Mappa became the next target of public ire, and it would be very difficult to argue with most of the critiques that were leveled against using CGI in anime. It did look weird, and it sometimes does look out of place, and it can ruin the experience of a show. But the question nobody ever seems to ask about traditional production methods is, at what cost? Meet Tetsuya. He's an animator who was interviewed by the New York Times last year to talk about the working conditions in the Japanese animation industry. As a top animator and occasional director, Tetsuya takes home about $3,800 in a good month. On a bad month, it can go as low as $1,400. If Tetsuya has only good months, he will come in right at the average annual salary of Japan. Throw in a few bad months and he's well behind. Why would a top animator have to work so hard just to hit the mean salary in Japan? Because the engine of the anime industry runs on freelancers. That is, people with no salaried position who ping-pong from project to project, filling in keyframes, directing scenes, and drawing tween frames when they can.
After the key drawings are timed and completed, they are checked and the finished art is sent off for the in-between process.
It is grueling work with extremely long hours and underwhelming pay. And in 2020, with the pandemic and the following boom in streaming, the anime industry saw a huge increase in the demand for, well, anime. With this explosion in demand and several new works being announced, you'd think the wages of these workers would have gone up a little bit, but they didn't. And they won't, because the animation industry is a life goal for lots of young people. Young people who see it as an opportunity to live out their life, fulfilling their creative desires. Young people who are willing to sacrifice the stability of a salaried position and their best years working grueling hours for a chance at a below-average wage in an industry they idealize. An industry that will not pay them any mind when some 80% of them never rise above those conditions and eventually drop out entirely. AKA, suckers. And the good thing about suckers is that there's always a fresh crop to fill in the ones who drop out. And just to be clear, this isn't an F-capitalism video. Nobody's being forced to go into animation, and if I ever get monetized, you can bet your sweet ass I'll be running ads on these videos. But the New York Times does a pretty good job of laying out the pretty bleak situation for an animator in Japan. The truth of the matter, though, is that most of you already know this. If you've been into this scene for any amount of time, it's likely you've read an article much like this one. But that didn't stop you from watching last season's shows, did it? Do you even know what the working conditions were on your favorite shows this season? Do you even care enough to look it up? And this isn't meant to make you feel bad, and I'm not saying that you need to stop watching anime because of the working conditions. Far from it. Knowing this, and being guilty of this blind consumption myself, I think we should be open to ways of mitigating the downsides of our pastimes, whether that be through supporting workers' reforms in these studios, or innovations in the tech behind these productions. The expected pace, scale, and quality in the modern anime market is immense, and is only expected to expand over the next decade. And that seems like a pretty bleak prospect for animators, with wages being so low and CG being so... yeah. That left the industry with little option for a way to meet this expanding demand without simply expanding the use of these freelancers. And that seemed to just be the case until... What Mappa's doing with Chainsaw Man is demonstrating the future of big-budget anime production. Mappa is obviously no longer the art house that Maru set it up as, but a huge industry player. Faced with this new scale of production, Mappa needed to find a way to scale up what is, at its core, an artistic product. Mappa's thesis is that artists will handle the key characters and scenes while the CGI provides the backgrounds and fillers. This process is called compositing, where 2D characters are drawn into 3D worlds. It's obviously been done before, but not nearly this well. Mappa is proving that with the right know-how, 3D can enable the productions at the scale and quality that viewers want. Look at this 2D scene versus this 3D scene. You'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference. The 3D is almost perfectly blended into the background of this scene. This is doubly true because, believe it or not, I flipped the labels. Did you notice? Because I actually lied entirely. They're both composites. Animation studios are stuck in a hard place between meeting the demands of an industry that runs on seasonal releases and viewers that chew up IPs and forget about them just as fast. There's also the problem that most of the source material these shows are adapted from looks like this, or this. You can't animate this. This took one artist a few weeks to draw this single pane. Animating this in 2D would take an impossible amount of time. So instead, outsource the frame setting to the computer and let the artists focus on the centerpieces. Chainsaw Man is the best proof of this production formula that I've seen, and shows that in the right hands, these methods could very well be the future of animation. And I'm not saying that 2D is going away, just that in the future, for these big seasonal showpieces, we might not have to grind up so many intern bones to make them happen. And that's probably a good thing.